it's just a matter of what the public, I think, is going to be interested in, and that's a decision that journalists make all the time. I think the larger question, though, is to be careful from the very beginning about assuming guilt, whether the person's a juvenile or an adult, and to remember the very basic principle that our criminal justice system is based on, which is that you are innocent until the jury has found you guilty. So it's not so much a matter of the juveniles being involved and whether or not you name them or how you protect their identities, as it is just being careful about the facts and following the facts as a journalist.
Next question is for Ms. Hunter. How should public information officers release information that will not lie?
Well, for one, not inserting your opinion, but that's one of the things I actually saw a lot during the course of this film, public officials inserting an opinion, basically calling these suspects guilty before they were proven guilty or innocent in this case. And that's one of the things that I face a lot. I was a reporter. I was on the other side of the defense, and I understand the need and the want to get as much information as possible and also get some emotional reaction, particularly from the people you're interviewing, because as a reporter you're trained not to be biased, but at the same time as a public official, I know it's difficult at times, but you really can't insert yourself into the story or the case, particularly before it goes to trial. I'm often approached by reporters that ask, well, tell us how you feel about this. What kind of person would do this? And although it's tempting, you've got to kind of stay away from questions like that.
Well, I have to say that this documentary was an eye-opener for me. I, too, have worked the other side, and that is working with victims. But this was an eye-opener, I have to say. I'm not an attorney, and so I can't give legal advice to any of the students. And I would have, before watching this documentary, said to the student, make sure that you get legal counsel, make sure that your parents are there. But now, I'm not so sure what I would say to the students, because these kids, these 5 students, and these 5 young men, and the criminal justice system still failed them. Big time.
I think it speaks to there's a little bit of journalism culture to want to be the first one to break news, or to want to get a little bit of piece of news that no one else got. I think that's a situation that takes place, and sometimes you're just blindly thinking in your head, this has got to be true. I got it from someone that I trust. It's got to be true. And the idea that not, or it doesn't really be false, doesn't really come to your head, because sometimes you're working with strict deadlines, so you're working with only an hour to do something. So I think a huge lesson would be to not always take everything as strictly as you want the story to be. You want the story to be the one that everyone's grabbing off the shelves because it's dealing with something this drastic, but at times that's clearly not the case. You want to be more sure with you're putting out the right information and maybe the best selling information or the stuff that people are going to gravitate towards.
I'll just add that I also work for news, I shot news, and the thing I did, as well as I was taught through the National Press Photographers Association, is let the interviewee or the subject know that you'll be there even after the story. Develop some trust, some integrity, versus storming in their place, interview them, and then you never see them again. They can't contact you. let them know that you'll be there. And I do that to documentaries as well, because even for us filmmakers, it's harder for you in media as well. It's harder to get interviews after you see how people get railroaded and how things get twisted. So that's one thing for future media makers out there. Do that, I'm sure you'll get better subject interviews. Idea. Good quote.
Too, if I can add is, you mentioned the desire to be first as reporters, and I definitely think that is there. And the other thing too, though, is the media actually can put a lot of pressure on law enforcement, and I did see some of that in this. If you think about it, you have this woman was brutally attacked. Who could be out there that did this? Are we in danger? And so there is this desire for law enforcement to solve these cases as quickly as possible. And sometimes, unfortunately, I feel that sometimes the media pressure and attention can add to that.
My son was murdered when he was 20 years old, and I had a lot of interaction with media. And also they did a documentary. And after reading my story and watching the documentary, I was wondering who was it really talking about? I felt that they really like to sensationalize stories, and I think they need to be a little more careful, the media, about sensationalizing. I think what they do is they add a spin to the story so that they can grab the attention of people, to their article.
For Mr. Ford again, watching loaded words like wow can be avoided in journalism.
Well, because they play into just what my fellow panelists were talking about here. It's easy to latch on to terms like that and to advance a story that way. And part of the problem here is, as journalists, we think of them as stories. And I tell my students that, that's what you're doing. You're telling stories. It's not just that you're putting a bunch of facts out there, but you're doing something that human beings have been doing for thousands of years, telling each other stories about what's happened. And there's a natural tendency in doing that to play up certain aspects of a story, to hit upon certain words, and to make them the headline of the story. And that's something we have to be careful about. We want to tell stories, and we want to tell them sometimes in archetypal ways, like people have been telling them for thousands of years, but we have to be careful that we're telling the true story as well, and that we don't play into and create public fear and make things worse than they need to be, basically, by doing that. So, I think everybody, and you saw several of the media people in this film talk about this, that, we failed, and we needed to step back, we needed to look at the facts here, and instead, we just played into all of these expectations that the public had, and which our own instincts, I think, for telling stories made us fall prey to.
Definitely part. That's the question. Now, why is because, one, getting funding when something's really sensitive is hard because the funder thinks they're going to be affected. And let's say if I wanted to do a film about Governor McCrory and what he's done that I don't like, I work for the state of North Carolina, okay? So in a perfect world, yeah, I can get to America, I can do what I want to do, but the real world, you better think again, especially if your dog and your kids are just going to look at you when you come home and say, how come I can't eat? Okay. So let's see what else is there. one of those is E&O insurance. It's called, error and omission insurance. If you're going to do a film, you need to get that, and that way you can't get sued by somebody for defamation of character or making a mistake. Or let's say if I have a picture of Dr. Flores here, and then I have, I don't know, somebody like, I don't know, the worst person in the world, devil behind him or something, and that defames him, then I can't get sued, okay? And then another thing too is, I want to say, but I like films like this is because this is what I got into filmmaking, to make a difference, to impact change, and there's films like, other films like this, like in Westminster 3, there's this Thin Blue Line, very required viewing, Thin Blue Line by Errol Morris, and yeah, I would say, yeah, it definitely impacts it, but at the same time, if you do it, okay, one last thing, I'll try to wrap it up. The other thing is, you can't just come out with just the facts, going back to how the media attack the story, source of the story. The audience wants a story. They don't want a history lesson, you know? They want a story. So sometimes people don't have a great story, so they create things like the word swallowing and all that. So anyway, okay, I'll go my okay.
I don't want to necessarily bring up certain instances, but I will say that in this day and age, no one really gets a fair trial. In my opinion, we have 24-hour media. If people aren't getting their news from a 24-hour station, they can easily go online, read it on the internet. And not all of that, you have to remember that you're seeing now is necessarily factual. There are a lot of blogs, opinions out there. So it's really important for, especially as journalists, to not necessarily play into everything you read, the public not to necessarily do that, really do your research. And while it is about finding the story as a journalist, it's also about providing the facts. And from a law enforcement standpoint, that's why we try to be as transparent as possible. I know under our leadership right now at the Brindle Police Department, that is one of the major things that we focus on is transparency, getting that information out before the public even can, and finding ways to reach different audiences so people in the public are getting their information straight from the source and it's not going through multiple different outlets. But it's just really important not to play into some of those stereotypes. I don't know how nice you do, but I can say that as a reporter, I had certain news directors that really played into some of these stereotypes. If it was a gang member that shot and killed another gang member, that wasn't a headline for her. She didn't care. She only cared if it was a white woman killed by a black man, vice versa. That definitely played into their decisions on what made headlines, what got ratings, and it was hard as a young reporter going into that. And this is your boss, you're supposed to listen to them, but you also have to kind of listen to your gut and do the right thing as well.
Well, to be honest with you, I've not seen that. You really see it, thank God. And of course, I'm usually with the victim, never with the defendant. So, but my recommendation would certainly tell a student, if they feel that they're being coerced into lying, would be to go to the chief of police, who would be the supervisor for the detectives that are doing the case.
Well, by being reporters, by checking it out. You saw an instance in this film where the New York Times reporter, whose name escapes me now, mentioned how a number of news outlets had done chronology of the so-called wilding event. And when you looked at the chronology, it didn't make sense that these kids could have committed this crime at this place at this time, which should have been logical for a reporter to spot and see and call into question from the very beginning, and to have that in mind as you're covering this trial. So, you know, there's plenty that you can do. You can look up facts on your own. And you can check and look against the record and see, does that make sense? And I think often reporters tend not to do that. We have a natural bias toward the public authorities, and, you know, for the most part, that's justified, I think. You know, you want to trust your police department, right? And you should. But people make mistakes. All kinds of people make mistakes. And sometimes, there have been plenty of cases in recent years where we found people have gone to prison for years and years because, you know, those mistakes were made, and sometimes they were deliberate mistakes, including coerced confession. And I think, you know, my profession is culpable in this to a certain degree because we don't ask enough questions along the way. You know, when we cover crimes, when we cover trials, we tend to err on the side of what the authorities say. And we use the word allegedly, but we don't seem to take it seriously enough that, hey, the defense might have a point here, right? And so it's just a matter of being a reporter and doing some digging and double-checking things.
I think one of the reactions is the fearful, and my recommendation always to any parents is to not do an interview by themselves, always to have someone there with them. Even to this day, I still am very concerned about anyone interviewing me as far as like crime statistics here at CU, and I demand that they record our interviews so that if there's something that goes into the newspaper that I did not disclose, then at least I know that, you know, it's going to take. They did stories on my son's case. I was on 2020. They taped me for hours, and they only selected the things that was sensationalized. So I just would say to parents, beware and be